project to study the Nagas of the Assam-Burma border, in one sense, started well over 100 years ago. There were two intersecting channels which led up to this project. One was personal. My great uncle Jim Elliot, went out to the Naga Hills, or the edge of them, as a tea planter to a Taucock plantation which was just on the edge of the Nagas in the 1890s, and stayed there for 25 years. Later, when my father was looking for a job, his uncle, by marriage, arranged for him to go out to the Assam Tea Company where he'd worked and to become a tea planter in 1936, and he remained there through the war and through to 1965. So it was on the borders of the Naga Hills that I was born in 1941 in Shillong, and I was brought up with Naga objects to play with and seeing Nagas, and later when I went back a couple of times from school I saw Nagas and they were quite familiar. Much later, when I became interested in anthropology and was wondering where I could do my research, and my interest in anthropology no doubt was partly derived from that early experience, I decided to go and work, if possible, in those very same hills among the neighbouring Khasi Garo peoples of Shillong. So I was appointed Christoph von Führer-Heimendorf as my supervisor, who had worked there and was one of the pioneers of Naga studies. Unfortunately, I couldn't go to Nagaland because of the political problems of 1968 when I was going. So I went and worked in Nepal, in fact. But I always remained interested, obviously, in the tea plantations and in the hills that surrounded them and the peoples of those hills. Later, when I came to became interested in multimedia and so on, and started to film interviews, I interviewed Führer-Heimendorf and became aware of the wonderful photographs, over 2,000 photographs he'd taken on his expedition to Nagaland in 1936, 37, 38, and also later his films, his diaries, and the photographs of Ursula Graham-Bow and other Naga experts. So that was the sort of personal channel. The intellectual channel, which again converged on Heimendorf, was that in the 1880s, 90s, as the British tried to deal with these warlike peoples on the edge of their valuable tea plantations and their expanding empire, they decided that the best policy was not to try and dominate and conquer these peoples, but to rule them very lightly and give them guidance. In other words, to send qualified, experienced district officers, and in particular district officers who were interested in anthropology and in local customs, to work with them. So a rather remarkable set of district commissioners was located in the Naga Hills. J.H. Hutton from the First World War, T.C. Hodgson, J.P. Mills, and they documented, collected artifacts, and later helped to set up a certain brand of anthropology. The first two professors of social anthropology in Cambridge, where I was later to teach, were Hodgson and Hutton. And they encouraged and supervised and helped Führer-Heimendorf when he went out to work with the Nagas. So it all converged in those different ways to the mid-1980s, when I was looking for a project to succeed the work I'd done on Earl's Cone. What I was now interested in was to try and look at something beyond a textual database system like Earl's Cone to something which would incorporate my growing interest in film and photography. And just at that point, i.e. the mid-1980s, a new technology came along which seemed to open up huge new possibilities. This was video disc. It was a Japanese invention, I think, but certainly the Japanese made the early video disc players. And so what happened was that you now had a thing that looked like a large old-fashioned gramophone record, a 78 revolution per minute gramophone record, which I'll illustrate. And on this there were 54,000 grooves, and on each of these grooves you could put either a picture, a bit of sound, or information if you wanted. What we decided to do was to put moving film. You could put it on at 25 revolutions per minute, which meant that on a video disc you could put 30 minutes of film and 10,000 photographs, for example, and also have a soundtrack with 35 minutes of sound. So that's precisely what we started to think about doing. None of the technology was really available. No one had made an anthropological video disc up to that point, or even really a video disc of academic kind at all. Simultaneously with our experiments, fortunately and interestingly, the BBC were suddenly aware of this possibility, and I started to work with Peter Armstrong and the Doomsday disc, as it was called, to celebrate the Doomsday. So the BBC in the mid-1980s were making a disc about contemporary Britain to celebrate in 1986, the anniversary of Doomsday. That was a big experiment, and we were working in parallel with them, indeed with the same software engineers who were making the indexes for the Doomsday disc were involved in our project too, Martin Porter in particular. So we started to experiment. This meant devising all sorts of new things because this hadn't been done before. How would you transfer, for instance, the thousands of photographs which Hutton, Mills, Heimendorf, Ursula Graham-Bauer, W.G. Archer and others had made onto something which could then be put onto a video disc? And so we developed a technique using a half-frame camera to turn the images round and to store them on a tape which could be made into a video disc. How would you transfer the films? Because this was a very expensive process, so we found a very simple tube with a couple of lenses which turned the film round, put a camera at the other end, played the film and filmed it being played. And so with all sorts of fixes to get round the problems, we began to develop our project in the mid-1980s. It was a small team. Julian Jacobs, one of my former students, Anita Hurley, who was then doing her MPhil, Sarah Harrison and myself were the main team. And we worked very closely together developing this new technology and this new way of storing information. The video disc itself was only part of the process because you needed to put on all the very extensive texts, the thousands of pages of fieldwork diaries, fieldwork notes, tour diaries, manuscripts of books, all the other sorts of things as well. And somehow, and this was one of the wonders of video disc, link it up, because each video disc frame as it were, had a unique number. And so it seemed likely and possible that you could get a computer, and they were beginning to develop faster, in particular the Amiga, which we were using then. You could think of having a program which would play a film or take you to a particular bit of the video disc. So the idea became feasible that you could have programs or a database on the computer which would link you to the images on the video disc, so real multimedia. But unfortunately there were no such databases and no such controlling programs available. So with Michael Bryant and Martin Porter, we developed such programs based particularly on the museum cataloguing system, Muscat, which Martin Porter had developed. And this became possible, taking the Muscat program down from the mainframe, writing guides to the Muscat system and so on. Now the aim was to make this video disc so that you could preserve the data. A video disc inscribes the data with a laser, so it looked as if it might last for, we hoped, for centuries, preserve it forever, but also it was now in a portable form, which would mean that you could send the video disc to those who wanted it, in particular back to the Nagas, because it was obvious that here, as in other areas, you had a mass of material in Western collections, archives, private individuals' hands, which would be wonderful if it could go back to the people about whom it was written. So we wanted to send this material back. That was one aim, and to preserve it, which was another aim, and also to use it in teaching and research so that people could access it. And alongside the video disc, we decided we would make two other forms of the project. One was a book. The marvellous visual materials deserved to be published, and so we worked with Hans-Georg Meyer, a publisher who had worked in that area and in Burma, and he masterminded a book written by Julian Jacobs and illustrated both from the photographs we had and also photographs that Hans-Georg took of the artifact collections, his own and in museums. And that was later published as the Nagas. And also we wanted to experiment with another form, which was a museum exhibition. So the Cambridge University Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology agreed to have a temporary exhibition in the top gallery of the museum, devoted for a year or two to the Nagas. And there we set up some of the objects in the fine collections in the museum, some of which had been brought back by Heimendorf, and also reconstructed a Naga longhouse or morung, boys' dormitory, into which we put a copy of the video disc and the player, and people could go in and watch the films and actually half re-enter or enter Naga society. It was quite ambitious for the time. And all that worked very well, the exhibition, the video disc and everything. It was tough going because we didn't really have much funding, and we scraped together a little bit from here and a little bit from there, and in particular towards the end we were supported by Jerry Martin and the Renaissance Trust, which made the final completion possible. And it was all completed and finished in the early 90s. But then what? Well, what happened then was that video disc as a technology didn't catch on, except a little bit in Japan. Even the BBC Doomsday disc more or less disappeared. The BBC microcomputer faded out, the video disc players were not renewed. So within 5 or 10 years of the Doomsday disc and our project, no one could use them. We'd sent a video disc back to Nagaland with a video disc player, but no doubt that disappeared and no longer worked. So it sort of fizzled out. It was like the Earl's Cone project in that we developed things 10 years too early, really, because it was only in the early 21st century that the same developments which affected the Earl's Cone project, namely the development of hard disks, of proper editing, of codecs, of the internet in particular, and of digital space and other repositories, meant that one could revive the project and redo it. And again, a huge amount of work was involved in redoing, taking all the stuff off the video disc, putting all the textual materials in, and this was mainly done by Sarah Harrison, and rewriting all the software, because the earlier software didn't work in this way. So through a set of different software experiments, ending up with Explorator, Richard Bolton's software, which now holds it, we began to see if we could put it onto the internet, and finally we did so, and then we finally put it onto the university library server on DSpace, which is where it is now. And so all these different streams have led to another pioneering project, as far as we can see, battling against technologies, but learning a great deal on the way about how to deal with different media, indexing systems, probabilistic retrieval systems, the joys and pains of small group projects, and hopefully preserving for posterity and for the Naga peoples themselves a record of a culture which is one of the best documented, perhaps the best documented of all tribal societies, and certainly its artifacts, its beautiful cloths and jewellery and other materials, is the best single collection of such materials in British libraries and museums. So that was the Naga project.
Sajagama, Bye.